Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the FPA, the IFE and the National Fire Chiefs Council, can I offer you a warm welcome to Fire 2020. Not the way we originally planned it, but thanks to our professional chair, a superb panel of internationally renowned speakers, our innovative events team led by Melissa Harrison, the generosity of our panel of sponsors and the ingenuity of Showcase ABI, I believe that we have a memorable and thought-provoking day ahead. I hope that you enjoy the content and it was stimulated enough to participate in what I hope will be a lively, interactive Q&A. I'm particularly pleased to welcome our Minister to today's events. I'm sure that you'll be aware that Lord Greenhalgh was appointed Minister of State back in March and his responsibilities straddle MHCLG and the Home Office, giving him oversight of both Fire and Rescue Service and building safety. I've met him over Zoom and I found him most engaging. Since he arrived at the department, he's been very busy indeed, meeting various stakeholders and progressing both the building safety and the fire safety bills through the parliamentary process. Of course, many of you in the audience today have been campaigning for root and branch change to building regulations for a number of years, and long before the Grenfell tragedy. Nevertheless, we should congratulate the Minister and the departments that he represents for the progress that he has made during such turbulent times. I can almost guarantee that the final proposed changes will not go far enough for some of us, but like you, I'm looking forward to hearing him providing us with an update shortly. But as I have the floor for the moment or two, it would be remiss of me and probably out of character if I was not to point out a few improvements FPA would like to see to the proposed legislation as the bills continue through the current scrutiny before they become law. I know that many of you will have read and seen reported with horror the nightmare that is unfolding almost daily at the Grenfell inquiry. Minister, I think that we all fully accept and support that we need to redesign and rebuild a broken building regulation system. Indeed, the government should be congratulated on what it's proposing as a first step. I'm certainly not alone in being slightly wary of the two-tier approach proposed, but there is at least an acknowledgement that it needs to be fixed, and that is a start, and it should be welcomed. However, as many people explained to Jane Judith at the very start of these investigations, it is not just the system that is broken. The guidance and regulations themselves are ambiguous, outdated, and subject to abuse. Yes, I know there's been a building regulations review underway. I actually sit on the ADB working group BRAC. And whilst I fully accept that we need to go through the due process and undertake the research and assess the evidence prior to change, my question for today is, are we setting the bar too low from the start? Let me explain. When I speak to people outside the fire sector, most are surprised to discover that the only requirement of UK building regulations is to ensure that in the case of a fire, evacuation occurs before buildings collapse. So what do I mean by that? So long as everyone is rescued before a fire destroys the building, building regulations are deemed to achieve the primary goal of ensuring that no one dies. Quite correct. But think about it. This can be considered an incredibly low bar because, as we all know, fire can have a devastating consequences for businesses, communities and individuals. And on that basis, Minister, all these fires are deemed to be building regulations successful. But ask anyone who's living through the aftermath of a major incident, and they will tell you that getting out of the building is only the first hurdle. Rehoming families, finding a new location for a care home or a school, recovering lost schoolwork, or trying to resurrect a business can take years, as we know. Some people and organisations simply never recover. Whilst the protection of life in the event of fire is, of course, the priority, it will be of no surprise to many that at the FPA we believe property and business protection require far greater attention than it currently receives. Those responsible for business or service management need to consider the immense cost and upheaval caused by disruption and take action to mitigate the risk. Achieving this kind of organisational resilience is, of course, just part of responsible management. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it is that no single event should be able to cause an organisation to fail. Sadly and unfortunately, far too many organisations fail to undertake any business impact analysis, and this too, we believe, should be required in law. It would drive the risk assessment process and the development of the fire safety plan. If Grenfell, the fallout of the Hackett review and the revelations uncovered by the public inquiry have taught us anything, it is the responsibility of building owners and managers to have a better understanding of how their buildings are put together and how they will perform during a major incident like fire. They must know their building, and this is the theme of a 12-month campaign FPA is launching today, just as we enter our 75th anniversary year. And as acknowledged in the proposed legislation, this should not be restricted to owners. It should also be the right of building occupiers. We believe that it is vital for everyone to know what material the building is made of, how it is constructed, and the level of competency possessed by those who carry out works to improve fire safety. But we should also go much further. Yes, building and business owners need to implement robust fire protection and prevention systems, but not just those that focus on evacuation and rescue. Buildings need systems that limit fire damage to a building, enabling the fire and rescue service to be effective and ultimately to see the building back into use. For those who have already taken the leap, this is most commonly achieved by the development and maintenance of a fire strategy for each premises. And whereas building owners and occupiers have been prompted or nudged in this direction by Grenfell, many still fail to have a complete and comprehensive understanding of the buildings from a fire safety standpoint. As we know, preparing for a fire is not an academic exercise. A fire can occur at any point and without warning. What's more, in challenging economic times, there is the additional risk due to the increase in buildings and greater prevalence of arson. I'm sure the Minister will be well aware of the fact that deliberate fire numbers have remained stubbornly high, despite better and more welcome news elsewhere in the recently released fire statistics from the Home Office. Of course, the current pandemic has already brought economic hardship to millions. A fire without the proper protection and prevention systems in place could be the tipping point for many businesses that are currently struggling to stay afloat. Minister, we simply cannot afford this to happen. We need to broaden the base of building regulations to ensure that we have a built environment that is not just fire safe, but one that is truly resilient. Yes, the current building regulations review is considering the issue of property protection. But with a project research budget of less than £50,000, are we really doing the subject justice? And was it any great surprise that there were no takers for the first time this project was offered? Resilience, or the lack of it, is becoming a major issue in modern buildings. From what I'm told, none of these fires were particularly remarkable when they started. Thankfully, no one was killed in any of them. So, as I've already said, they probably rate as a building regulation success. But the resilience failures of these structures are clear to see. They were susceptible, they involve combustible construction. At least 2 of them were down to fire breaking in, which is not considered in current building regulations. They were vulnerable, containing combustible voids with poor compartmentation. There was external fire spread. Of course, none had sprinklers. And this all leads to a situation which is non-recoverable because, as we heard last year from Mark Cashin, the Chief Fire Officer of Cheshire, despite the Fire and Rescue Service's best endeavours, they didn't have a chance of saving that care home. So what's the consequence? Is the retirement home still trading? What disruption has been faced by the vulnerable occupants? What's the business impact of Premier Inn, Holiday Inn and the other hotel we saw in the Shetlands? What disruption is faced by owners and occupiers? What life belongings did they lose? What is the true loss of fire? Minister, now is the time to recognise the wider cost of fire. ABI figures confirm that the cost of fire to the insurance industry, including business interruption, has remained around 1.5 billion a year for the past 3 or 4 years. At the FPA, we've analysed more than 4,500 large loss claims to see what can be learned about major fires, their financial impact, including disruption of business or essential services, and how they could be avoided. Each of the claims in the database represent losses of more than £100,000. From January 2009 to December 2019, the average large loss fire was over £600,000. This is a phenomenal amount of money for something that could be mitigated against. But these figures are only half the picture. The cost of fire is equally about disruption, loss of momentum, loss of customer base, impact on brand, customer retention, and rebuilding business. Nowhere is this knock-on effect more evident than when we look at essential services. For example, when a fire occurs in a care home or a hospital, the toll on staff, patients, and their families can be enormous. Even if residents or patients are saved from the initial fire, they can suffer, and for conditions of distress associated with upheaval, breaking their care, and loss of their familiar surroundings, this can be life-ending. Similarly, if a school is destroyed, the legacy can be significant. According to Zurich Municipal Schools in England, are nearly twice as likely to suffer a blaze as other commercial buildings, and large schools in fires cost on average just under £3 million to repair. In some cases, they're more than 20 million. I don't need to tell you that finding a temporary location for a large school with hundreds of students and teachers is never straightforward and can result in elongated interruption to learning. Even if an alternative site is found, it is rarely in the same area, and so there can be significant logistical challenges in transporting pupils to the site further away. Stress levels for parents, teachers and management, as well as pupils who may have lost key coursework or facing exams, is an important factor to consider, even though it is hard to quantify or measure. So, apart from embedding property protection into current legislation and demanding that those responsible undertake a business impact analysis, what can simply be embraced in the current legislation to ensure change? As we all know and will hear more of later, trends within the building industry towards the use of more combustible materials such as timber and plastics have contributed to making fires more complex, more severe and harder to tackle. As a result, many fires in apartment blocks, schools and care homes are notable for their extent of fire spread and total loss of the building. Decisions regarding building design are often made based on aesthetics or sustainability rather than long-term resilience. We strongly believe that it is the job of building designers, architects and fire consultants to work together to use materials that are appropriate to supporting the risk, protection and long-term care needs of the occupants. But simply, high-risk buildings such as schools, hospitals and care homes should not be constructed from combustible materials. This is not rocket science, but it does now need to be enshrined in law. Those responsible for the management of businesses or services or individual buildings within them should be aware of the solutions available which mitigate the risk of a major loss. Having a good knowledge of a building and therefore where a particular solution is appropriate or urgently required is essential. I've talked about the need for business impact analysis and touched upon our strategy. We believe that it should be a regulatory requirement for every company to have a comprehensive strategy in place. A building safety strategy will help owners know their building and its processes. It will establish how the building is constructed and describe the key components, both physical and managerial, of the fire safety arrangements. A fire strategy provides building owners, occupiers and managers with relevant information so they know what changes need to be made to the nature, layout, use and occupancy of premises to mitigate risk. When putting together a fire strategy, organisations should set clear objectives for business continuity and where appropriate, buildings should be compartmented to contain fire-secure means of escape to prevent loss of life and property damage. Organisations, both private and public, should use the fire strategy to undertake a business impact analysis and develop a business continuity plan. The fire strategy also forms the basis of the fire risk assessment, which both current and proposed legislation requires to be undertaken by a competent person. Minister, however reassuring the word competent feels, it is simply not prescriptive enough for life safety critical services that support fire. And whilst I am fully supportive of the work led by the Construction Industry Council on their competence framework, the building blocks are there, but ambiguity still exists. A simple way of ensuring competence is by independent third-party certification. The government has recognised this for many years in the regulation of gas. You now need to embrace it in fire. Don't restrict it to risk assessment. Extend it to those supplying life safety fire protection equipment and services. There is currently no consistent definition of what competency looks like for fire risk assessors, building managers, installers or maintainers of active or passive fire protection systems. Third-party certification is the only way to guarantee the competence of installers and fire safety practitioners and to ensure traceability and suitability of fire safety products, including fire doors, sprinkler systems and alarm systems. I am sure that the industry will support you, but if you don't yet feel confident enough in the market's ability to react, at least consider offering a statutory defence in law for those who choose to use third-party accredited firms. Third-party certification should also ensure the more widespread adoption of risk-appropriate fire protection systems. What do I mean by risk-appropriate? At the FPA, Minister, as you're probably aware, we're working hard to lobby the government to change the law that sprinklers, for example, become mandatory in all high-risk buildings such as schools, hospitals, care homes, multi-storey buildings, and to be included in warehousing stock. So as I close and prepare to listen to what the Minister has to say, my message is please embrace building resilience in the proposed legislation. As I've said, we would like to see risk assessment include a business impact analysis, providing a clear understanding of the capability lost by fire. A good knowledge of a building, including how it has been constructed, the systems and processes in place to protect against and prevent fire, and the individuals responsible for installing or maintaining systems is essential in protecting it fire damage. By identifying fire safety blind spots, organisations can ensure they are resilient as possible with fires and to mitigate against significant losses that can occur when proper systems are not in place. Minister, I invite you to support our Know Your Building campaign and ensure that our built environment is both safe and resilient as we move from the tragedy that has tainted our fire safety record in the UK. Thank you.